Let me tell you about these Boston Celtics. Let me tell you about these Boston Celtics. Let's go. 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 The Boston Celtics came into enemy territory and absolutely took control of the whole game. You know, they had their foot in the freaking Knicks' neck. You know, they were here to make a statement today, and they did. You know, they came off a 2-frustration loss at home. You know, the Celtics needed to respond, and they did. You know, they did it in front of a whole, hostile New York crowd. You know, they delivered emphatically. You know, Boston set the tone early. Jason Tatum looked sharp tonight. You know, the jump shot looked good. You know, he was hitting shots. He was in rhythm, crashing boards. You know, he finished with like 28 points, 10 rebounds, 5 assists. You know, a complete, full performance by him, and he really showed that, he's one of them guys. You know, he's one of the league's elite, two-way players, and no one can front about that. You know, but he just got to keep it consistent, though, and he'll be all right, you know. Jaylen Brown, too, followed suit, aggressive on both ends. He dropped like 24 points, adding energy, intensity. You know, the defense looked real good, you know. They were missing that in game 1 and 2, you know. But this wasn't just about the stars. You know, Derek White played good. Pritchard played good. You know, Derek White had he had a little quiet, kind of like a quiet, efficient game. You know what I'm saying? Because he had like 18 points, 7 assists. You know, he made smart choices, smart decision on the court. You know, he was posterizing defense, not posterizing, but putting the defense on the post, taking his time, so, they did it up, they did it real. But the Celtics really won this game today. It wasn't really about, they did hit shots. They hit shots, but they played defense. They clamped down. You know, the Knicks had like 15 turnovers, they were limited. You know what I'm saying? They were limited to like 93 points. Well below the, their playoff average. So, every rotation was crisp. Every closeout was tight by the Celtics, And the New York Knicks, they struggled. They struggled to, find their rhythm. Jalen Brunson led the team with 22, but it was a tough 22, It was an inefficient night, by Karl Anthony Towns. He did add an 18, but no other Knicks scored more than 12 points. That ain't good. Boston led by 13 at the end of the first quarter, and then it ballooned and led by like 17 on halftime. And they never looked back. That's just what it is. Every time the Knicks tried to cut into the deficit, the Celtics kept answering back. They kept the same intensity throughout the whole game, which was good. Even the role players got into the action. Sam Hauser hit a pair. Timely threes. Payton Pritchard played a hell of a game. He brought the hustle, ball movement, to the second unit, and it was just a beautiful game. From the bench to the starters, it was a beautiful game. They got to keep this up. They got to get that 2-2. They get that 2-2, go back home, and it's a wrap.